She even put the couch out for you guys. You know, like so right. I know. We sat at the table too. Good.
Welcome everybody. Thank you for your time. We're getting ready to call the meeting to order so we can get started. Hi, Bill George, Superintendent of Schools. We start with Ms. Gallagher as the Secretary of Business Administrator. Call the meeting to order. Okay, so at the request of board members, we're just going to give a little background information about where we're going to be going between now and the end of April, with tentative and then ultimately the final adoption of our budget process. And it's an ongoing process, so if you notice, and you look at our board-approved meeting schedule for the Board of Education, you'll see a series of budget hearings. This is the first of this. This is designed to show the public the major drivers that are in the budget and that are involved as part of the budget process. And, you know, it really begins, if we could go to that second slide, it really begins, yeah, that's great. It really begins with the strategic planning process between 2015 and 2020. And we use that as a driving force. They were in the process, as everyone knows, with the strategic planning process for the next 5 years. Our next forum is on February 12th. We welcome any and all participation from our community and the public. Those are the primary drivers. Since September, we've really been working with the administrative team to review through a process of actual spending where we have come from in the last year and where we're going. And that's really what we're going to talk about at this point. I think to begin with the end in mind, we'll switch now if we to the speakers to show what information that's up on the website, and I'll let Mrs. Gallagher, our business administrator, Mrs. Doherty, take it from this point. I'm sorry, I'm getting a timeout call. Oh, we now 5, so we'll call the meeting to order. Okay, great.
Mrs. Kennedy, Mr. DeFranco,
Here.
Mr. Donovan, Mr. Grano,
Here.
Mr. Little,
Here.
Mrs. Mays, here, Mrs. Wright, Mrs. Stella, here, Mrs. Rock.
Here, did you go?
As Dr. George indicated, what's up on this? I'm sorry, can you remember that?
Okay, I'm trying to
I think that's what Dr. George wanted. What's up on the website here is, Dr. George referred to this as our N5. This is just to call your attention to the page on our website. We have a budget page on our website dedicated to all of our budget information. And we have the information still up from last year that you can take a look at. We have our user-friendly budget and our budget presentations that we gave in the process of developing last year's budget. So as you can see, presentation this was. I think this is the one from our final budget hearing on May 1st of last year. So you can get an idea of where we were at that time and all of the information that we presented at that point when the budget was being finalized by the board. So that is something that you can refer back to. We will be adding the 2021 information to this page as we develop the budget for this year. So Dr. George talked about our approach to the budget. This slide is just a recap really of the current year. Just to refresh everyone's memory, so for those of you who aren't as familiar, the 1920 budget, our current year budget, included a general fund tax levy increase of 2%, and that equated to revenue of about $2.8 million. the district has bank cap available that was generated in the 18-19 year, because in that year, our tax levy was less than 2%. So there is a provision that if your tax levy is less than 2%, the difference can be banked for future use by the district for 3 subsequent years. So that amount, that $1,059,281 that's still up on the slide, is available for the board to use in this budget, coming up the 2021 budget, or the 21-22 budget. If it isn't used by that time, it will then expire. Last year, our state aid was reduced $552,000, and we'll talk a little bit about state aid in a bit. We also benefited last year from an approximately $2.1 million, or 8% reduction in our health benefits cost for 1920. And why this is important is it was a big driver in how we were able to offset the reduction in our revenues and also maintaining a lot of the things that we have in our budget currently. We did not have any significant capital improvements in this year's budget. We did some smaller projects, but nothing significant. We did across the hall, we did the auditorium lights and sound, but that was actually in the previous budget. We did some smaller things around the district, but nothing significant. So moving forward, we can talk about state aid. So I don't know if all of you are familiar with the legislation that came out that's called S2. But in case you're not, that was legislation that was put in place that basically reallocated the state aid among all of the districts around New Jersey based upon whether the state feels that a district is overfunded or underfunded. For Middletown, the state looks at us as being overfunded as far as state aid. Therefore, we were one of the districts that would be losing money over the next several years. It actually started in 18-19, and we are going to continue to see the effects, as we'll talk about in a bit. But based upon the projected impact and the percentage this year, we are estimating that our state aid will be down about $850,000. And some of that is due to S2, and then there's other factors that cause it to decrease. We won't actually know what our number is until the state aid numbers are released after the governor's which is normally around the 3rd week of February. But last year, they delayed the state aid numbers. We didn't get those until March 7th. So again, we don't know exactly when we'll find that out, but we'll finalize our numbers so we know what that number will be. So this chart lays out what our estimates are as far as the reductions going forward that will be as a result of the continued implementation of S2. We have a few of the numbers that we know that are actual, 18-19, 19-20, those reductions already occurred. The first year, we'll just give some explanation of that. The S2 reduction was $314,000. However, we were reduced, and this was the year, if those of you are familiar with our budgets, we received our state aid amount in March of 2018 for the 18-19 budget. Subsequently in July, all of the districts were given a new state aid amount based upon this legislation, and as a result, our aid was reduced $314,000 as a result of S2. But the state also took back another $800+ thousand that they had included in our original state aid allocation in March. So altogether, in July of 2018, the district had to reduce its budget almost $1.2 million after the year had started because of the change in the state aid amount. Last year we lost $552,000. This year we're estimating $850,000, and then we've estimated the amounts going forward, totaling at the bottom almost $6.5 million. However, I just also want to explain that this is an estimate, and it's not as simple as taking a percentage times a finite number and determining what your reduction is. The number that you're multiplying these percentages against changes every year. There's other factors, and they also recalculate, what they think, where they think you are as far as adequacy, and so so forth, and they also will change other factors in the formula that will change these numbers. So we can't predict with certainty what the numbers are going to be. We can only do estimates to the best of our knowledge.
Just one question on that from the 2018, 2019. I think for 2017, 18, right, that 1.177. The state originally was going to take it away from us. I think there was some sort of intervention, right, to make us whole. I think we had like state senators and stuff like that the year before. They came back and they said, okay, we're going to make it whole. So they gave it back to us the previous year. So that 1.2 really, if you start with 2017, 18, that would be a reduction. So when you look at the 1.2, that should be about 6 points. Right. So I think what happened is there was I think we had our state senators.
Well, there was what happened was there was a reduction made for that year, and we submitted an application. It wasn't automatic. We submitted an application to statewide and just felt that those money should be returned. The application was approved. We tried to, and they've offered this in subsequent years. We have submitted another application the next year when our state aid was reduced, but the application was not approved as far as reinstating money. And I don't know that they're really, I think the last time, they made a reduction, for last year, and they offered districts the opportunity to apply for that. Very few districts across the state were approved. I mean, this different circumstances than we had.
So that was money that we once had that we no longer.
So the next slide, just to give you an idea of how enrollment factors into state aid. These numbers are going back from 2011 all the way up to our ASSA, our application for state school aid, that was based on the October 15, 2019 snapshot that we uploaded to the state. These numbers don't represent our full enrollment. There are some differences, such as regular ed preschool children are not included in this, and there's some other differences as well. But these are the numbers that the state uses in their state aid calculation for regular aid, and then there's some categorical aids you get as well based upon classifications of students. But the point of this slide is to show that these numbers that the state is looking at, and they take a rolling average, it's a rolling 6-year average, have been declining over the past several years. If you look at the current number versus 2011, it's gone down about 6.8%. So again, the state takes a rolling average of the last 6 years. Unfortunately, at this point, the higher numbers at the top of the slide have dropped off of that average. So, we are now starting, with numbers that are under 10,000 and going down to 93.76 for the resident enrollment number. So that has also impacted our state aid on top of this S2 legislation.
Yeah, just so those of you that have heard me speak at Parent Information Committee or others, we talked about a total student enrollment of our.
Those of you who have heard me speak at Parent Information Committee and speak publicly in other venues have heard me talk about 9,601 students. This does not include our Sharetime students, so students that spend at least part of the day here in Middletown, or our preschool students. So there are other populations that we still have to educate that there's an expense for. And even with our Sharetime students, we actually pay to send them to vocational or other opportunities for the rest of the day, but we're not getting full credit for those students when it comes to financial aid. So it's just the state aid.
Other factors that impact our state aid, besides enrollment, are the status of our district budget, whether we are viewed to be over or under adequacy, and we'll talk about that in a bit, and also the property values and the income of the municipality. In our state aid notices, they do present those numbers and they multiply them by factors, and that is a component. Property values will be based upon the assessed valuations of the properties, and the income is derived by the municipal code that you put on your state tax return. So if it's not by zip code, we have 8 different zip codes here, but everybody who uses the Middletown 4-digit code on their tax return, that's what they count. The adequacy status, above or below for our district, has varied greatly over the last 6 years. 6 years ago, we were considered to be $4.6 million under adequacy, meaning that we were spending our adequacy budget as the state calculates it, and not everything in our budget is included there, but based upon that calculation, we were spending $4.6 million below what the state was saying was the appropriate adequacy budget. Now, it doesn't mean that should be your budget, it's just this calculation they make for funding. So now in 2019-20, they're saying that we are $3.6 million above adequacy. And actually, just last year, we were $8 million above adequacy. So even between last year and this year, it's dropped $5 million. The number has basically gone, almost in a peak. It's gone up, it's gone back down. And me and other business administrators have all been looking at these numbers and trying to analyze them. And there's some parts of it that we understand, but there's other parts of the state aid formula that we don't really understand. And that was really the genesis of the Oprah request that a lot of districts have joined on to file with the state to get the details of these calculations, because they're assigning these funds and not everyone knows, or hardly anyone knows exactly how the calculations are being done for assignment. So
This is Tony. I'd like to just hit a little bit on this too. The property values, the regular assessment that happens in Monmouth County,
It's not consistent across
the state. There are other counties that don't have the regular reassessments that we do. And from our perspective, that's also why we requested to open the state and get more information on the exacts of the funding calculation, because naturally that would have an impact if there was regular assessments throughout Monmouth County, and in Middletown it's annual, and we're compared to other districts across the state where those assessments on property values don't happen on a regular basis. That would have an impact on the funding.
this is just a little more about the concept of adequacy. And again, it's the state's calculation of what would be the necessary funding level to provide a thorough and efficient education to every pupil in the district. And there's various weights and factors that are assigned to the students in the district and their needs. So it takes into account certain expenses, but there are certain expenses that are not included as well. And they also even factor in the geographic location in the state. So we don't even get 100 credit for 100% of that. North Jersey would be more than 100% actually, and it's a small differential down. My point is there's a lot of factors that go into this. So for this year, currently right now, our general fund tax levy for the 1920 budget is $143,618,000. So just to give everyone a perspective of what we're looking at as we're developing the 2021 budget, an increase of 2% on that levy would equate to about $2.8 million. And our bank tax levy cap that's available is $1,059,000. But what I'd like to point out, and this is what the state looks at as far as allocating funding, it's one of the factors. The state has calculated that they believe that Middletown's local fair share tax levy is $172 million. Now, that is not a recommendation by the state of what our tax levy should be. It's simply a benchmark to show whether our tax levy that we have now is considered to be above or below Middletown's local fair share. Now, there are some districts where their tax levy is above their local fair share. And we are considered to be considerably below our local fair share. So again, it's a benchmark, it's not a recommendation at all, but it's just something that we need to be aware of because that's how the state is viewing us at this point. But even with that in mind, the governor did veto a proposal to allow districts in our position where we're losing state aid to exceed the 2% tax levy cap unless you're considered to be under adequacy. Now, we are over adequacy, so it wouldn't have helped us anyway, but they vetoed the whole concept. But even if it had gone through, we wouldn't have been able to take advantage of it because based on our calculations, we're over adequacy. So, on one hand, being told our tax levy isn't high enough, but there has been no avenue. And not that anyone's recommending that you go over 2%, but it's just the whole question remains as well, how then, if you are taking away funds and the community wants to balance its budget, there's no tool to do so if the community so chose. So another funding source that we have are grants. Our main grants that we receive are IDEA, which is funding for special education, and ESEA funds, which is funding toward our at-risk students. Our current grant allocations are about $2.4 million in IDEA and $725,000 in ESEA. So the total for this year is about $3.1 million compared to last year about $3.2 million. So there's not a large fluctuation there. Sometimes it goes up a little, sometimes it goes down a little, but when we build our budget, we're conservative. We don't count on getting 100% of these funds, but we generally include about 90% of our current year's allocation so that we are factoring that in, but we're not over-relying on it. This chart is to demonstrate the trend of the district's excess surplus over the past several years. Excess surplus is defined as the amount that is basically left over at the end of the year after you run your budget and your revenues and expenses, whatever's left over. If the remaining amount in your fund balance, which is what would be the difference there, is over 2% of your operating budget, that's considered to be excess surplus. The state does not want you to keep that. So you have the option, what happens with excess surplus is that it gets applied to a subsequent budget. Now, our excess surplus that we had that we were able to include in subsequent budgets back in 2013 was around $2 million. That has now dropped to zero for the last two budgets. So at this point, we don't have, and we did not generate any excess surplus in the 18-19 year to use for our 2021 budget as a revenue. Now, some would say that that's actually, and in some ways it is a good thing because you don't want to rely on this excess surplus to be funding your budget because it's not a recurring revenue all the time, but it's just to demonstrate that you don't have that option at this point. This slide captures our capital and maintenance reserves currently. The district does have two reserve accounts, one for capital projects and one for maintenance. The capital projects reserve, the trend has been that we've been able to make deposits into it that we dedicate to projects in a subsequent budget year, and the money sort of flows in and out based upon the projects that we are doing. The balance at the end of last year was $1.4 million, but we have dedicated $140,000 of that to be used during this current year. We have $1.3 million basically available to use in the 2021 budget, but we may not use all of that because it only can be used for projects that qualify to use this funding for. It's really only capital projects that would be in your long-range facilities plan. So we have this money available. If we don't do that much in projects that we could use this money for, we won't utilize all of that in next year's budget. We're still reviewing all of those projects. So if we did use the maximum amount we could use, we would really have not about $49,000 left at the end of the year. So we're still in the process of determining how much of that we're going to use in next year's budget. Our maintenance reserve is a reserve account that was set up in 2011 when there was an opportunity to take some funds that were saved out of that year's budget and establish this reserve. We deposited $1 million back in 2011. There have not been any subsequent deposits, but we have been drawing down on it over the years to fund larger maintenance projects that were unbudgeted, unexpected during the year. Things, and everything we pulled it out for has been larger in nature, a couple $100,000, $100,000. So we've taken a few withdrawals out of that over the years, and at this point our balance is $555,000. We have not utilized any of that money for this year, although there is an issue that we are looking at that we may be using some of this money for if we cannot find the money. We have some HVAC repairs that need to be made that we don't know if we can fund in this year's budget without taking the money out of reserve, so there may be a withdrawal this year. We don't budget to use that money in our next year's budget. The approach has been to keep that money for unexpected things that we don't budget for. You can budget it in your budget, so if we chose to, we could take some of this money and put it in our budget, but then we wouldn't have that to fall back on if there was something unexpected. So that is money that's available if we have any unexpected expenses. But just to give you some perspective, the state gives you guidelines of what your maximum can be in these reserve accounts. So the allowable balances that we could have in our capital and maintenance reserves are $104 million in our capital reserve and $7.7 million in our maintenance reserve. So as you can see, we're not in any danger of exceeding those limits at this point. Of course, the biggest driver in our budget, and it makes up a significant portion of our budget, is salaries. Currently, salaries represent about $102 million out of our nearly $165 million general fund budget, or about 62%. At this point, and this is the first time in a few years that we are doing a budget where we have settled contracts with all of our bargaining units going into this budget. So that's a good thing. We do not have to make any estimates for settlements or so forth, but this gives you an idea of where we stand with all of our bargaining units. This is coming up the last year on the MTPS contract. That's our biggest contract, and the other contracts expire in 22 and 23. But fortunately, we do not have to deal with an unsettled contract going into this budget. So in relation to our large salary component of the budget, staffing considerations are obviously a big part of developing our budget for the upcoming year. So we start that process in the fall, and it goes on through the spring and even into the summer as we assess enrollments. But we've been monitoring our student enrollment, our pre-registrations for next year, most specifically at the kindergarten level to see who is coming in. To try to look at staffing needs at that level. We've also been looking at scheduling at the high schools and the middle schools to determine staffing needs for those sections. So I think we're right on target as far as the amount or the estimated percentage of incoming kindergartners that are pre-registered right now. That it helps us if they register early. Late registrations in the summer can cause us to have unexpected needs that we didn't foresee. So we've also moved up the timelines for scheduling to try to get a better picture of that earlier in the process too. So this is something that's ongoing, and it's a lot of work between the central office team and the building administrators. The next slide is to show you as of January 28th, where we stand with pre-registrations and current enrollments at the elementary level. You can see overall, we're projecting, based upon the enrollment numbers that we have now, a change of a decrease of a little over 100 students overall at the elementary level, with most of the schools showing decreases, a few schools showing some small increases. But overall, at the elementary level, we are showing a reduction in projected enrollment. The next slide shows the middle school and high school levels. Again, at the middle school level, overall, we're looking at a reduction in enrollment with a small projected increase at Bayshore. The Thompson and Thorne are projected to be decreasing. At the high school level, it's basically a break even of a difference of 8 students projected at this point, with a little bit of an uptick here at North and a little bit of a downward tick at South. But again, these are projections, and this is January, but based upon the numbers we have now, this is what it looks like, but we are constantly monitoring and updating. So after salaries, benefits is probably the next biggest driver of our budget. Benefits doesn't just include health insurance, but it also includes items such as the pension contribution, Social Security that we pay, unemployment, workers' comp, all of these things that we have to fund here in the district. Health benefit premiums are the biggest component of this area. And as I mentioned earlier, for this year, we were fortunate, based upon our loss trends and so forth, and our claims experience, that we were able to negotiate a reduction in our health insurance costs for this year. Currently, we are projecting an increase in health insurance costs. We've included that in our budget projections right now, but this is something that we work on for months, and we look at, we market our coverage, we look at different funding options. So that's not something that gets finalized in January. That's something last year, I think we were able to get it finalized around March, but it's generally, March, April, depending upon the situation, it could even be early May. We get our best estimates before we have to finalize our budget, and a lot of times we do have final numbers before we finalize the budget, but we don't have them at this point, and we are working with what we can, and we have to keep updating. So our preliminary estimated increase for health benefits right now that we have included in our budget model is about 7.9%, which would equate to approximately $1.4 million net of what the employees contribute towards that coverage. So instead of seeing a decrease as we did for this year, we're looking at an increase for this year. But again, we don't know our actual rates until later, and we will be updating this over the next several weeks as we go through the budget development. In the area of curriculum and instruction, we've had a lot of conversations about various new adoptions that are anticipated for next year. They're listed here: mathematics, K-5, high school, history, human geography, world languages, English 3 and 4. There's other initiatives and requirements that we have to address. I won't read them all aloud, they're all here for you to look at, but the bottom line is the curriculum budget is going to need to be more robust than it was last year. We are seeing an increase in that area because of these curriculum updates that are needed and these other initiatives that we have to address just to be in compliance with state standards. So we are reviewing that, of course, along with every other area of our budget, but it is something that we don't really have an option to not be meeting standards, and the county superintendent looks specifically at this area to make sure that we included in our budget items that will bring us up to what the current requirements are before they will approve a budget going forward. So, in the process of looking at all this, and this is no different than any other area where we look to negotiate, get things at the best price, but you can't just, you're not going to be able to avoid, these costs that are going to need to be addressed and included in the budget. In the area of facilities, we're not planning any large facilities projects for next year for no other reason that we simply don't have the funds. There are many things that need to be done around the district. We have 17 buildings, and there are plenty of projects to be done, but we can only do what can fit into our budget, and we have to prioritize the things that are most in need. Some of the things that we're looking at right now to include in next year's budget are the removal of some asbestos flooring at Nut Swamp in a small area, kitchen and some storage areas. We want to do some HVAC duct cleaning at Bayshore. We did Thorne and Thompson last year. We want to continue on that initiative. There's some gym dividers that need to be replaced, some other HVAC elementary unit repairs, painting, sidewalk work, It's nothing exciting, but it's all stuff that has to be done. Some other flooring replacements, and there's, some other things that we're looking at too. Again, this is all still in development, but there are some things that we're just not gonna be able to defer. And if there are some things that we end up deferring, we just all have to keep in mind that they're not going away, they're just gonna have to go into a future budget. We're also gonna be doing, it's not listed on here, but we're also gonna be doing some flooring over at Ocean Ave as well in the pond.
Can you answer a question?
Yes,
Didn't we replace all the roofs?
we did,
And why is Fairview not?
because there was one section of Fairview that had a slate on the roof, and we didn't replace that because at the time we did that project, it was there really wasn't any issues with it, and aesthetically, they didn't want to just take it off because, it's a slate roof, but unfortunately now we're experiencing issues with it that really can't be repaired, and so we're looking to do a replacement of that small section. We're also in the process of updating our long-range facilities plan. That's a 5-year plan in which we take each building and identify the needs of that building, whether it be, educational needs, structural needs, maintenance needs. We categorize them, and then they are scheduled out over a 5-year period based upon priority and need. So we are in the process of updating that. The long-range facilities plan also includes other information, evaluation of our systems, and also evaluation of the use of the buildings. We're updating our floor plans in the long-range facilities plan, which will allow us to calculate capacity. And we've talked about capacity, and they calculate it using DOE guidelines and also our district practice. So we're getting updated numbers on that to use as a planning tool going forward. So we're in the process of getting that updated. The next couple of slides are just to give you some perspective on the buildings that we have here in the district. Now, all of the buildings have had renovations and additions since they were originally built, but the core of each of the buildings, that's still in existence, we were showing the original years that they were built. And at the elementary level, you can see our newest elementary school is New Monmouth, which was originally built in 1968. We have buildings that date all the way back to 1928. So it does show you that our facilities are aging. And, the buildings are in 1928, we're now in 2020, if you can believe it. So they will actually be 100 years old this decade. So these are things that we have to address and deal with. And, when buildings start aging, there's things that are needed. If you flip to the next slide, we show the same thing at the secondary level with our middle schools and our high schools. Bayshore, the core of Bayshore was built in 1931. Thompson and Thorne were both built in 1960. And High School North was built in 1952. And our newest school in the whole district, the South, built in 1974. And again, there has been some renovations and additions to these buildings, but they are originally built in these years. And there are parts of these buildings that haven't been touched in a while as far as renovation.
I'm sorry, I have a question. Can you back the slide?
What's that?
Can you back the slide? So with the buildings that are aged, I just wanted to also put out there that a lot of these buildings are likely not ADA compliant. So
That's correct.
is that part of the long-range facilities plan upgrading to ADA compliance?
Well, at this point, that has not been factored into all of the buildings, but it is something that, we talk about a lot in the district. I mean, the cost is.
I think it's one of those that we spoke about. If we make renovations over a certain percentage of the value, we go up to buildings that need to be renovated. Now, all of a sudden, ADA push. A lot of the bathrooms are not ADA. Any building that's 2 stories that doesn't have an elevator, right? So, it's going to be very expensive. So, I think it's if we really go in there and touch some of these buildings in significant fashion, and we have to
sorry.
Right, that's right. If we were gonna do a significant renovation, to, even if we just were gonna significantly renovate a bathroom, that would all have, you would have to bring it up to be ADA compliant, and, Mr. Little's right, if we were gonna do something to our entire building, then of course we would have to address those issues at that point too.
There are other issues as they relate to curriculum, which we'll be talking about next week, in the age of facilities as well.
The last couple of slides are just to give you an idea about the transportation around the district. And it does vary from school to school, the percentage of students that are bused and as opposed to walk. As you can see at the elementary level, we have a school like Harmony where only 13% of the students are actually transported by bus. They're all live very close to the school. And then we have schools like Lincroft where all the students are bused because of the location of the school, and varying degrees around that. Village, about 70% are transported. We have some there in the 30s, 57% for Navasing. So this gives you an idea of how many students we are busing percentage-wise each school. The rest of the schools are on the next slide. Ocean Avenue 11%, and so on. I won't read them all now. The high schools are both about 58%. Overall, as a district, we bus about 55% of the students to school, so roughly a little more than half. And the last slide is just our timeline. So obviously, this meeting was meant to give you an overview of the drivers and factors that are influencing our budget overall. We have all met with the school and department level administrators to review the needs of their buildings and their departments. And we are focusing on staffing and scheduling, as we mentioned before. We have another budget meeting next Wednesday, February 5th, where we will start presenting in more detail the budgeted amounts for the various departments and looking at the initiatives and the things that we are looking to include. And our tentative budget must be submitted by March 20th, which is a Friday. We will be voting on our tentative budget at our March 18th voting meeting. And then our final budget must be voted on. We'll have a public hearing and a vote between April 24th and May 7th. Our April meeting doesn't fall within those dates, so we're going to have to probably have another meeting to do that. But that just gives you an idea of the timeline. So we are here on January 29th. We've done a lot of work to get to where we are with the budget so far, but we have not by any means finished the budget. Yes, we still do have a gap between the revenues and the expenses that are currently in our budget. It is, it is a considerable amount of money, it keeps changing every day as we revise and we try to look at things, and either we see things that needed to be included, it didn't get included, or we see things we can take out, so it is a moving target, but it's millions of dollars at this point. So that's what we're looking at, and we have to find a way to bridge that gap for next year.
So Amy, just to summarize it, healthcare, premium, we saw the benefit to the environment, so that could be substantial itself. If what you say,
We don't see that right now. We're obviously, as we said, we're still working, that's the area we're still working.
Curriculum looks like we're going to have a big jump. There's a lot of curriculum coming online. I think we talked about that in the last board meeting. Significant costs in terms of buying those programs and basically executing them. And then salaries, we've gone to bargaining, right? So we have contracts that have built-in escalators at the pool level, and that's a pretty large part of the whole budget. So by just the sheer nature of what we need to do, required by the state, to ensure employees and to pay our employees, we automatically we're going up, and that's not even considering the fact that there's significant capital improvements that are going up. Is that a fair way to summarize?
That's a fair way to summarize it. I mean, with the salaries, and all of you on the board have been through our presentations from last year and even the year before. We do look to streamline our staff as much as possible, where there's retirements where we don't need to replace, or if there's positions that we don't need due to enrollment, we do look to address that, and we have done that. But as you mentioned, the bargaining units do have contracts, and we do have to have a certain amount of staff, obviously, to staff up classrooms and so forth.
My point was that you have, if the budget left on its own, it's gonna grow.
Yes,
So
yes.
If we don't add anything, it's going to grow.
Oh,
And I'm not saying, but my point was, a lot of those increases in salary are cost of living, right? So
Yes,
the point being is that you just said, if you just say, hey, let this thing go, it's not gonna balance itself. It's like, it's an automatic increase.
right, no, right,
So that's what I'm saying.
right, even if we didn't, even if we didn't add
Consciously
anything,
do
to your
something.
point, right, everybody's, all the salaries, if we didn't change our staffing, the salaries are gonna go up. Benefits, rarely takes, big drops, they usually go up some percentage, our average over the past several years has only been about 3.4%, which is very good. But it's gonna, that's gonna trend up, over the course of the years. And you're right, things cost more. I mean, we have done things to save money in some areas, such as, good news is we do see our electricity spend has gone down because of the measures that we took through the solar and the other things that we did as part of our ESIP. And, there are other expenses that we've been able to shrink, but other things go up that, we can't control. That's all. We'll be back next week.
Can we ask questions?
Yes.
I just.
If you could go up.
But if you
Oh,
want
you
to step
wanna-
up to the microphone?
Video and audio, so we want to make sure that the public who's watching from home or watches it in over the future coming days has an opportunity to hear your question. Sure they could benefit from that as well. Thank you. Ms. Bissett.
Yeah, Bureau of Safety, Middletown. Just a few questions on the slide, sorry. On the state aid side, you have a column with percentage. I didn't know what that was a percentage of. I assume that's not a percentage of the entire state aid, it's just a percentage.
Okay, that's a good question. That is a percentage of, the reduction in the overfunded amount. So it's not your total state aid. So what each year, and it'll be cumulative up to 100. So for example, the first year, they looked at our overfunded amount, what they calculated, and took 5%. The next year, they're gonna take what they feel that we're overfunded. Every year they run a new calculation, and the number goes down because we keep losing aid, but they take that new number and they'll multiply it by the percent for each year. So for this year, whatever they say we're overfunded in our state aid notice, they'll multiply it by 23%, and that's what we'll lose for this year.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure because I didn't see what our state aid was in here, but I knew it wasn't just 6 million.
Right,
so
no, it's about 16 million
it was
right now,
last year.
for the current year. And I don't remember exactly here, but it's
Okay.
60 million and change. So, we'll be losing, but we won't be losing 23% of that, we'll be losing 23% of what they say we're overfunded.
Amy, it's part of that special education, right? In other words, the remaining special education, in other words, our general education funds will be significantly reduced.
Right, what they're actually reducing, there's a component of our state aid called adjustment aid, and that is, the way it's being calculated now, we're not entitled to any of that, so they're reducing, that's basically what we're losing out of our budget. But to your point, we have other categorical aids, and besides that general pot of state aid, we have special education aid, we have transportation aid, and those are not being reduced, those are just being run as the formula goes, and we're being given that money. But as far as just general state aid, we're looked at as overfunded, and they're reducing it then.
Okay. On the capital and maintenance reserves, just maybe because I was around the last time, we're not at risk of the state saying, well, you have some reserves here, so we're gonna reduce that this is protected, what's in the capital reserve. I just remember some years ago with the 2011, 2012.
There was one year, and I think it was actually 2000, it was before I was in Middletown. Because I was in my
Yeah, it
previous
was.
district, it was maybe 2008 or 9.
Yeah.
I know, we all are. So the state said that they were gonna take everybody's reserves unless they had a plan for it. So in any case, even if the state decided to do that, I mean, we have such a small amount, and we have definite projects lined up, that we could use to use that money, that we could show that that's why we need that money. They, like in my previous district, they took our money, but like you said, the state or plan for money, they actually gave it back to us. But I haven't heard anything about that, and actually what's happening now all around the state, these districts that are losing money, they're all emptying their reserves. We have very low reserves to begin with. The districts who had higher reserves, and I was just reading, the Freehold Regional, the Tom's Rivers, where they have larger reserves, they're basically putting all those down to their budget because they're losing these large sums of money, not gonna have any left either. So,
On the student projections, I just want to make sure I understand. Kindergarten, are those numbers 85% or that's your full projection of what will be in there?
at this point, we feel that 85% of the students who are going to be registering for kindergarten have registered.
So this is your projection.
That's our projection based on that.
Okay, so I'm just gonna pick one out.
Is there something you want to
Well,
talk about?
so just that, so when you have a kindergarten like that, it's saying, it shows 26. So the decision has to be made, are there 2 classes of 13? Or there are a lot of low enrollment.
Well, this is everything that we have to look at and how the numbers, continue to change and, right, where there's enrollments that are low at a particular grade level, you have to make those decisions.
Those represent the number of students who have already pre-registered.
Oh, those are
As of
pre-registered,
today.
so there could be more.
Okay. That's why it
So
represents about 85%.
that's what I was trying to figure out.
We're probably missing, based upon historical averages, about 15% of the total number of students have more that we don't know where amongst the 12 schools.
Right.
But we anticipate about 15%
Okay,
more.
so that's just the pre-registered, I was like, wow, okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Rachel Kanopka. My question's kind of a bigger one, and I know based on what you've explained multiple times, Amy, that we don't really know what the state does with the numbers we give them, when they churn out our state age number. It's kind of a behind the curtain thing that happens. Is there any information that they've shared, I know there's an Oprah request out, about, is there a base number that every district automatically starts with and then they go up or down based on the input figures you give them?
I mean, we do get a whole notice that goes through calculations, but the problem is some of the factors that are used in that notice is what we don't know where those come from. So, like I said, if you look through the whole notice, and you'll see that they'll weight the income and the property, and they'll look at your students, and for example, with the special education aid, they take those students and they give you more amount for that, but then they make assumptions that over your whole district, maybe 15% are special ed, but, where our percentage is higher, so, those things we can see, but it's these other factors where, they come up with multipliers for your property values, multipliers for the income, where, how our valuations stack up with others, and then, other factors. It's all these multipliers that you really don't know from year to year how they're deriving those.
Okay, so we have no way of, there's no little bot on a website where we plug in our numbers and it says, you should estimate you will be getting this. You just know
If
what
there
they're gonna tell
was,
you.
it would, every district would be,
Okay.
no, there isn't, that's the whole crux of, that's what we would like to have, but.
I guess one of the things I'm thinking of, and I don't think I'm not saying I think we should do this, I'm just wondering, could there ever be an advantage to us from a state aid perspective to essentially be 2 districts that apply separately for state aid that have a ton of shared services? Like if we had 2 districts, could we get a state aid sum that would be greater than what we're currently receiving? Or would there be any benefit to that? Or would there be such a huge negative to that we would never even consider it?
I don't know the answer, and I'm not sure legally. I mean, I know there are municipalities that have more than one school district, but they're for different grade levels. I don't know legally, that would be more of a Rusty question, whether one municipality could have 2 K-12 districts.
Okay.
There's some that have like a K-6, then maybe they'll have a regional, like 7-12 or a high school, but I don't know that two districts, same grade levels, same thing. I really don't know if that's either.
Also, I've been
Reading a lot of articles and trend right now across the street,
I really
trying to combine and consolidate. So the idea of
dividing up the district.
No, I recognize obviously that's the trend that the state is trying to get everything going to regionalize. It just seems like if this is a game we have to play and we would get a better result out of the game if we played it this way, maybe it's something we should consider. But obviously there's probably multiple tangents that would.
I think in strategic planning, things like that should be considered in terms of, the state saying you should consolidate, but Freehold's going to be killed.
Yeah.
They share with 5 high schools. So I think the state says one thing and does another. So you can see where some of the difficulties were with bargaining, with contracts, right? You can see some of the issues, but I don't think it's something that should ever be taken off the table because we should maximize our resources, but also maximize part of those resources being money we get from the state. So I don't think there's any serious conversation, but I think it's always something that should be considered, especially the size of our town. Even when you talk about the township, there's been discussion of, you have all these different parts of it. How do you service the whole town? It's kind of a very big, I think we're the 5th biggest school district, Dr. What's the size in the state? With like in terms of non-city, because urban, I think we're one of the top 5, right?
No, I think Edison's at 5 if you're including that. So if you're talking just suburban, we're in the top, probably in the top 10 and just outside of it. Largest K to 12 in Bucks County, Freehold Regional is the largest total student population.
What does Freehold Regional have? Actually, I read an article today and I can't remember the figure.
I don't know exactly,
10?
but I think it's closer to 12.
Okay,
It's closer
so
to
bigger than us, but not by a ton.
Yeah, no, but
Okay,
So they're broken up by
Yeah.
high schools.
yeah, they have this.
Great focus for that one thing, and public program. Overall, with the strategic planning, especially, we're trying to look at efficiency. I mean, what this is that you brought up about sections and, dividing a section versus, what do you do with that? So going to 2 districts with double overhead.
Well, no, I'm actually wondering if you become like, on paper you're 2 districts, but essentially if there's like 99% overlap in shared services. Yeah, I assume that, but I just, it feels like they've set a very interesting obstacle course for us to have to work through, so maybe it's just being creative about how you navigate through it.
and just to that, I'd like to add from what we get in our meetings with superintendents and with the county office, and I would concur with the movement is towards consolidation, not separate.
No, I get that that's what they want everybody to do, but it seems like sometimes, like you said, Freehold is getting nailed, and they followed what the state has, in theory, said is ideal. So it kind of makes you think. I have a couple of different questions. Am I still allowed to stay up? I don't have time with this. Are we good? All right. Based on the projections, I know that I've seen in various slides about our state aid kind of trending. Right now, the furthest projection we ever see is 2024-25, and we'll be at about like 12.5 million-ish. Does that sound about right?
Right, because that's the last year of the implementation of this S2.
Okay.
So beyond that,
We really have no idea beyond that? Like that's what I was gonna ask. Like, do we have any indication as to, or did any of the S2 legislation spell out, like then it has to stay static for 10 years to let people like adapt?
no.
No, okay. So we have to-
And even within the implementation of S2, they can only divide up money among the districts that's in the budget. And so if they cut the money for schools in the budget, there's less money divvied out. I mean, that's another, I didn't mention that before, but that is also a factor. If you put more money in the budget, there's more money to divvy up. If you put less money in the budget, there's less money. So that impacts the allocation.
And do they share anything about how they determine what their total pot is?
I mean, that's just the whole negotiation that goes into the state budget.
Okay. And then the last question, I know obviously we're doing this year's budgeting process kind of in tandem with the bigger strategic planning exercise. And while we don't know yet what strategic planning will yield, some of the things that might end up happening are pretty big. We have no idea what they might be, but they could be very large things that could either be big expenses or big reductions in costs for the district. Is it logical to assume that this upcoming year's budget will not include any of those massive strategic planning changes that may happen? Like all of that stuff that we figure out over the course of the next few months wouldn't happen until future budget cycles?
I mean, one thing I would say with relative certainty is it wouldn't include any large facilities changes because at this point, we would not have the time to implement that.
Okay.
But anything else I really couldn't speak to.
Okay. No, thank you.
While we're waiting, I have a question for John. I want to make sure I heard you right, because I don't know that I actually heard it. Did you say you think the town is having problems servicing all the areas Pittsburgh creates?
All I'm saying is over the years, it's discussed the township is very large. We have 12 schools. We have what is it, many neighborhoods, one town, right? That's their logo. That's the logo they put on the township seal. It's a township where we have different communities that have different needs. We have high schools, we have schools that have different needs. So it's not secret. I think people have said in the past, you start to have different parts of town that have different needs and different things. When things happen in town, right. So just like with the school district, we have very different schools. So it's a big town, is what I'm saying.
I misunderstood it, and I thought you were saying that you felt that they were having issues servicing all areas of town.
No, they just have to service a lot of different parts of town, that's all.
Yeah, that's personally, I think service got you guys pretty good.
Yeah, it's a big town.
If I could add into that too, tying in a couple different things, something that Mrs. Pasecki said, and something that Mr. DeFranco said. Number one, I think when we're looking at from the school side, the efficiency is really, really important. And Ms. Pasecki alluded to a kindergarten class, which right now, with what we project is about 85% scheduled at 26 students, right? So if school for the next year, we're about to start tomorrow, obviously, if 26 is a very large, and we've all said this, when our community comes to us, they point this out, large class sizes. We as a board do not support larger class sizes, but as you were alluding to, Mr. Little, with 12 elementary schools, the efficiency of running and the duplication of grade levels, which is really basically a service at every single one of those elementary schools, and depending on how many students go to those schools, there's a level of efficiency and or inefficiency that the monies that we have available.
Yeah, and I guess another thing about a township example would be something like the parks that we have, right? So there's renovations over at Normandy, right? But then you look at McMahon is, I don't know what's going on there, right? Or you look at Bodman is taken care of by the Middletown Little League, primarily. We have lots of different parks around town that the township is responsible for, but it's piece by piece, right? So you do one park, then you have various other parks. It's not that they don't do a good service, it's just that you can only, when you plan for the town, you have to plan what's going here, what's going there. And one part of town might get something in 1 year, and the other part of town might not. So that's not a criticism, but I think similar to schools, when we have our facilities budget, we don't have enough money, so we have to prioritize which schools get touched first. And you can see by their age and by just looking at them, by driving by them, a lot of them need something, right? They need fixing up, or just we have power washing them and whatnot. So it's not a matter of the services bad, it's a matter of prioritization and timing, right? So I was just pointing out that the township seems to have similar type issues for a township the size of 44 square miles and 70,000 people.
I just want to say thank you. This is a really good presentation. And I'm gonna put it in my purse and give it to anyone who has questions for me.
It's really well laid out. It's very easy to understand. And I wish there were more people here to read it. And I hope that people who didn't come tonight will watch the video and print this out, and really look at it. Because when we make our decisions, I think all of Middletown needs to understand the dire straits of it. And I don't think everyone understands it because when we come and ask for certain requests, there are things that we can't get them. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. I need a motion to adjourn to executive session for health insurance with Levy and contract negotiations. All in favor? Opposed? Abstained?
Next, here,